So let's go ahead and get started. It's a nice day here in Asheville, North Carolina. A little bit overcast, bit of rain. The students are actually on spring break today. So we had lots of easy parking, which is the good news. But we don't have quite as many people here. Usually we have a number of students and faculty and staff, so it's not quite as many. But that's fine. We still have a good group here. We are excited today because we are again branching out, and we have 3 presenting sites. Ourselves as the host site. We have Zurich as a presenting site, and London as well. So we're going to again try to hook into the 3 sites together, which adds to some technical issues at times, and there might be some audio pieces, but overall we're excited. I think it should work well today. So my name is Steve Buser. I'm a psychiatrist here in the Asheville, North Carolina area, and I'm a co-founder of the Asheville Young Center. We've been around for about 4 years or so now. This is our 22nd seminar, so we've had quite a few over the last few years and have been really pleased to see these going forward. We have quite a few countries again joining us today. We have over 100 people worldwide, so we had quite a flood last minute of registrations and have topped over 100. And we have 17 countries with us today. Those countries include Australia, Canada, Estonia, France, India, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Norway, Portugal, Russia, Slovenia, Sweden, of course Switzerland, and the United Kingdom and the United States. So yet again, thank you for so many people worldwide participating. That has been just a delightful part of this. Do visit our website, which you probably already have since you registered, but AshevilleYoungCenter.org is where we're at. We have live seminars like today. We have a new format called a webinar, which some of you have already participated in with a little bit different feel. We're going to continue both these video seminars with Zurich and other sites, as well as the webinars with PowerPoints. We have continuing education programs, social media, a regular blog, and then a good line of DVDs and some written transcripts of those DVDs too. So if you like a DVD, both of today's, which it'll take a few months to post it, but we'll get a DVD posted relatively soon on today's and the prior ones. A few announcements. We have 2 exciting seminars coming up, not too far ahead. May 10th is our next video seminar. That will be with Murray Stein and Paul Brutschy, again out of Switzerland. This will be a continuation of our Red Book series. Most of you know that Carl Jung published the Red Book. Well, he didn't, but his heirs published the Red Book not that long ago. We did a very popular one in the Red Book that Murray Stein led initially right after the publication. We followed it up with a second one. This third one will be looking at the images. We haven't looked so much at the images in the first 2, but we're going to focus more on the images on this one. And if you can get a chance to come to that one, May 10th of this year will be that. In June 28th of this year, we have another new format that we're playing with. We're going to have 4 presenting sites at that time: Asheville, Sonoma in California, Northern England, and Zurich. And that is going to coincide with the International Association for the Study of Dreams. They are hosting their large conference in California a few days before. We're going to get some of their lead presenters to go to Sonoma and present on some of the kind of leading talks. We'll also then have Murray Stein and another lady in Northern England, Margaret Wilkinson, who will be speaking on neuroscience, dreaming, and Jungian psychology. And I think that'll be a really delightful piece. We'll have a number of presenters from the IASD. We'll have presenters from Zurich and then Northern England as well. So be on the lookout for that. We'll announce more pieces on that later. A quick thank yous to UNCA, University of North Carolina, Asheville, which is where I'm sitting right now, the Department of Psychology, which is hosting today, as well as the Distance Learning Center and the North Carolina REN system, which does our technical pieces. We want to thank, as always, the ETH University, which is where Murray and Angela are sitting right now. They have very graciously allowed us to use their facility to broadcast from. Likewise, the Tavistock Center in London, England, is our other hosting site, and we'd like to thank them for allowing Jan Wiener to be there as well. And of course, ISAP Zurich, who has continually loaned us some of their best analysts. We really thank them for their participation with us as well. A few housekeeping items before I turn it over to the folks in Zurich and London. First of all, we are required to announce that we have no commercial support for presenters, topics, or programs. There is no pharmaceutical industry support of any kind associated with us today. There will be a brief survey after today's seminar, so do look out in your email for that and help us to give some feedback on what you liked or didn't like today. Do remember that we're recording, so anybody who asks a question over a microphone, your voice may well be recorded into the DVD. So if that concerns you, just write out the question and hand it to one of the presenters today. For the home viewers, there are a few things you ought to know. You are in a media site streamer. There are a few buttons that will be helpful. There's one that says Swap Media. When you click on that, it'll exchange the slides and the video. So if you want one to be bigger than the other, hit the Swap Media button. There is also a Enter Full Screen, which will allow the screen to get larger. And lastly, there's a button called Ask a Question. It looks like a little balloon. If you push that button, that's how you can send a question to me. Every so often we'll break. I'll go through the questions, and we'll ask as many as we can to the presenters. The thing I've noticed on my browser was you can't hit that little dialog button unless you exit full screen and have it normal size. Then you hit the button, but when full screen, the button disappears, which I don't know why that is, but that's how you ask the questions. Please turn off any cell phones if you're in a live site. And we will be 3 hours in duration with a 15-minute break. So let me introduce our speakers briefly, and then we'll turn it over to them. Murray Stein, most of you know, he's been our anchor, presenter. He has given the majority of our seminars. He is a wonderful speaker, which you'll yet again see today. He is the president of the International School of Analytical Psychology in Zurich, the past president of the International Association of Analytical Psychologists as well. Angela Graf-Nold, we are very pleased to have as well. She's a new presenter for us. She studied psychology at the University of Zurich and has a specialized interest in the history of psychotherapy and psychology. She has held positions at the University of Zurich, the Bergholtz Clinic, where Jung worked himself. Jan Wiener is presenting from London. She is a training analyst, both for the Society of Analytical Psychology and the British Association of Psychotherapists. She is vice president of the International Association of Analytical Psychology, and she has published widely on subjects including transference and psychological ethics, which obviously will be very important for today's talk. So without further ado, we will transfer over to Zurich and later on London, and thank you very much for presenting today. So over to you, Murray.
Thanks, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Maybe just a word about what stimulated this particular seminar. A friend of mine told me that he took his wife to see A Dangerous Method, the film, and came away from it. He knows quite a lot about Jung. She didn't know very much, and she said, "My goodness, I had no idea that's what they did in those early days of psychoanalysis." And that Jung was, her image of Jung wasn't very formed to that point, and the film made a tremendous impression on her. And that's what film does, of course. It gives you a picture of reality, may or may not be true to the facts. And so I wanted to take the opportunity, talked it over with Steve, maybe to do some reflecting on this film and take off from the film to talk about the early years of psychoanalysis, to talk about the history behind the film, the characters involved, and to give that film a bit of a context. And I think the film, while it's very exciting, very interesting, cannot be shown as a truthful historical documentary. Not that it was meant to be. One couldn't show it to a classroom as a representation of historical accuracy, historical period and characters. In fact, that would be a most dangerous method to try to use this film. In that sense, it is an entertaining film. Some people like it, some don't. I'm not going to comment too much on the aesthetics or the quality of the directing or the acting. I'll leave that to the discussion. People have very different views. on that. But I would like to just give a little bit of background about the film and where it comes from and what it's based upon. The story that the film rests on is a historical episode in the life of Jung. Someone once asked Jung toward the end of his life if he was interested in writing an autobiography. And he said, "Oh, no, my life was so boring. There was nothing interesting about it. I don't know what I would write about." But this particular episode in Jung's life has gathered a lot of interest around it since it was fully exposed and made known through Aldo Cartenuto, who in the 1970s wrote a book called A Secret Symmetry, Spielrein between Jung and Freud, the untold story of the woman who changed the early history of psychoanalysis. And Aldo Cartenuto had been offered a treasure trove of documents that nobody knew existed. They were found in an attic in Geneva, and he went through them and discovered an amazing amount of letters, diaries, important information about some of the early relationships and figures in psychoanalysis, mainly Sabina Spielrein, who was Jung's patient, and we'll hear a lot more about her in the course of the seminar today, and how she played a role in Jung's life and Freud's life. And in this book, he also offers the beginnings of a biography of her life. And a lot more work has been done on that since this book was published by Cartenuto in the 1970s. Sabina Spielrein was hardly known in psychoanalytic circles, history of psychoanalysis, until these documents were found and this book was written by Cartenuto. Since then, important work has been done. In the 1990s, John Kerr wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Method. And that is a scholarly work on this period in the history of psychoanalysis. And for his title, he draws from a letter by William James to Theodore Fournoy on 20th of September 1909, and in which James is commenting on his experience of Freud at the Clark University anniversary celebrations that Freud and Jung participated in earlier in September. And he writes, "I hope that Freud and his pupils will push their ideas to their utmost limits so that we may learn what they are. They can't fail to throw light on human nature, but I confess that he made me personally, he, that is Freud, made me, James, personally, the impression of a man obsessed with fixed ideas. I can make nothing in my own case with his dream theories, and obviously symbolism is a most dangerous method." So James is commenting on his introduction to Freud at Clark University and on symbolism, that is, Freud's approach to the interpretation of dreams, symbolism being a most dangerous method. He wasn't saying that psychoanalysis is a most dangerous method. John Kerr took this phrase, the most dangerous method, and broadens it to include the experience of psychoanalysis, that is, the transference, countertransference, eruptions that can take place within the context of an analytic relationship. And Jan Wiener will comment on that further later in this seminar. But the dangerous method, really, that James is referring to is the method of dream interpretation. Now, this story then was picked up and dramatized in a play by Christopher Hampton, that is a theatrical piece called The Talking Cure, played in London, I believe also in New York. And in that play, Ralph Fiennes played the role of Jung to great acclaim. What Hampton did was take the story and boil it down into a theater piece. So he's working from history toward theater, and in that process, of course, there's a great condensation and simplification, if you will, or one is moving from the thickness of history, in which there are so many details and so many experiences going on through these years between 1903, 1904, and 1913, the period of basically the film, A Dangerous Method. But this thickness of history is boiled down to a number of characters who are interacting with each other dramatically and powerfully on stage, moving each other, changing each other, dealing with each other. And that dramatization is very captivating and very provocative. It draws us in to a story, into a narrative. Now, whether that narrative is factual and historical and true to the period is a wholly different question. You're now in theater. The film, A Dangerous Method, pulls from John Kerr's title, A Most Dangerous Method, simplifies the title a little bit, and takes Hampton's play and puts it on film. So now you're moving from a historical scholarly work to a theatrical piece to a film. And at each stage of this process, things change and things happen. To move from a theater piece to film is it has its own issues and its own problems. And people who are very familiar with the art of filmmaking and the craft of filmmaking will tell you that's a most difficult enterprise. At any rate, what we have then in the film, A Dangerous Method, is a version of the story that's told by historians and scholars and that was put on stage by Hampton. Now, in this boiling down process, or the simplification process, basically in the film you get 4 or 5 characters who are interacting with each other. And I've diagrammed it in this fashion. You have C.G. Jung and Emma as a pair of characters. They're a kind of persona couple in the film. They're very proper. They look like English aristocrats in the film. They don't look very Swiss. Drawing room people, very well dressed, affluent, upper class folks, who are living a pretty conventional life in their marriage. And C.G. Jung is portrayed as a young psychiatrist at a clinic in Switzerland. The film, by the way, was filmed in Constance, not in Zurich. So again, you have the film story is not and the film setting is not the historical setting. There's a bit of a difference there. And then you have the other main character who is shown in the first scene of the film, struggling to. Film starts with a lot of noise and action pulls you into it. You think, oh my God, what's happening in the middle of the night and these horses running wild and all this noise. Something terrible is happening. And Sabina is being taken to the clinic in Zurich, to the Berkholzli clinic, and against her will, and struggling and fighting every inch of the way. And then in the next scene, you see the young psychiatrist, C.G. Jung, entering the picture and attempting psychoanalysis with her. And so you see a scene of what is generally thought to be Jung's first psychoanalytic patient. He's beginning to try to use Freud's method of psychoanalysis. At this time, when she comes to the clinic in 1904, Jung has not yet met Freud. He's read some of Freud's papers on hysteria. He's read Freud's book on dreams. He thinks very highly of this method. He wants to try it out, but he doesn't know how it works, really. And he hasn't seen it in action. He hasn't talked to Freud yet. But she's going to be his first patient, his guinea pig, so to speak. And so you see his early attempts at psychoanalysis in those scenes. And then there is Sigmund Freud, who plays the role of a kind of father figure, very distinguished gentleman, Viennese doctor, the founder of psychoanalysis, about 50 years old. Jung was about 30, 32 at the time, early to mid-30s. Freud is definitely a father figure, the senior figure. And the scenes you see between them, again, show a tension between a father and a son, a student and a mentor. And that's a whole story in itself. The Freud-Jung letters were published in the 1970s, and they show a very thick and very interesting and very dynamic relationship between these two men. All of that's very simplified in the film. There are a few scenes between them. Jung visits Freud in 1907 in Vienna. Freud comes to Zurich. They go on a couple of times. They go on a ship together to the United States, exchange dreams, so on. There's the big crisis about authority on the ship. And so you see the dynamic tensions between a son and a father figure. That is the diagram that runs between Jung and Freud. And then there is the figure of Otto Gross, who I think is a terrifically played role in the film. I was totally engrossed by Gross. I thought he was a fabulous actor and really very convincing. And Gross plays the role of a kind of puer to Freud's cynics. Freud thinks very highly of Gross. He says Gross and Jung are the two most promising figures in psychoanalysis. The problem with Gross is that he's addicted to drugs, and he's an anarchist. He's a believer in total freedom, free love, sexuality rampant. If you feel like doing it, do it. Make love, not war. That's Otto Gross. And Gross enters the Berkholzli Clinic as a patient shortly after Spielrein has left. He's there around 1907. Spielrein is there from 4 or 5. And then she becomes an outpatient. Jung continues his analytic work with her on an outpatient basis. And Jung and Gross engage in a mutual psychoanalytic process. They analyze each other, at the end of which Jung says to Gross in the film, well, I think your analysis is finished. Gross says to Jung, I agree, I think my analysis is finished, but I don't think yours is. He has gotten under Jung's skin considerably, and between him and Spielrein, Jung is starting to have all kinds of questions and doubts about his personal life, his marriage with Emma, the very proper persona couple that they present. And so you see him in the center under the pressures of all these different forces. And they all come to bear on him, come down on him, and create a tremendous turmoil in his life. At one point, in a letter to Sabina Spielrein at the end of 1908, around Christmas time, he writes to her that he asks her to be kind to him, to be understanding. He is now suffering. He was kind and understanding to her as her doctor when she was ill. He is now ill. He says, Ich bin jetzt krank. I am now ill. So something has happened to him. He is cracked under these pressures. Gross has gotten to him. This very intimate relationship with Spielrein has gotten to him, and his persona covering is cracking. And he gets involved in the film, and one doesn't know to what extent this is historically accurate or correct. According to the documents, it seems like they did move from a doctor-patient relationship in 3 stages. Jung writes about this, Sabina Spielrein writes about it in a letter to Freud, from the doctor-patient relationship to a friendship to making poetry or to love. So it's a 3-step process that they go through, and Jung no longer considers himself her doctor. They have now entered into a different kind of relationship. And this is very troubling to Jung because he's married and he doesn't know quite what to do with this relationship with Sabine Spielrein. And that's the film. The film really draws on that and presents us with scenes whose historical accuracy is very questionable. The whipping scenes, the lovemaking scenes. So nobody knows what happened behind those closed doors. That's left to the Cronenberg filmmaker's imagination, which he shares with us in the film. And this relationship between Jung and Spielrein comes to a head in 1908, 1909, at which point Jung breaks off the relationship because he doesn't know what to do with it, apparently. And he decides univocally on his own to end the love relationship and try to enter or retreat into a kind of maybe professional friendship relationship, collaboration about Sabine Spielrein's intellectual efforts or work or thesis and so on. He doesn't want to break off the relationship altogether, but he wants to stop the erotic or romantic part of it. And this is very upsetting to Sabine Spielrein. Letters go to Sabine's mother. One doesn't know where that letter came from, or those letters, Sabine thinks they came from Emma. At any rate, the mother, Sabine's mother, enters the picture. Jung is very embarrassed. He has to confess to Freud. There are those scenes in the film where he confesses that he's gotten over-involved with his patient, former patient, who has now become his friend and maybe his lover. And he ends it. In the summer of 1909, that's the end of it. It peaked in 08, late 08, when he says, I'm sick, I'm ill. And then she gets very upset and engaged, and she writes to Freud, and Freud gets drawn into the picture. And by the time we get to the end of the film, their relationship has passed its critical phase. We see in the last scene of the film, we see Sabine Spielrein, who's gotten married in 1912 to a Jewish doctor in Zurich. She's pregnant. She gives birth to a daughter, Renata, in the fall of 1913. In the very last scene of the film, and this is to be contrasted with the initial scene where you see her entering the Burghölzli clinic, wild as an animal, screaming and shouting and all the contortions and so on, body language that the actress Keira Knightley expresses. In the last scene, on the contrary, she's sitting with Jung, supposedly in his garden on the Zurich See in Küsnacht. Emma says to Sabine, go and talk to him. Maybe you can help him. There's something wrong with him. Now, this is 1913. Sabine is pregnant with the child of her husband. And they sit and have this conversation. While Sabine Spielrein, pregnant, is talking to Jung, and Jung is obviously troubled by these terrible dreams he's been having of Europe being flooded by blood and catastrophe overtaking Europe. This vision came to him on a train trip from Schaffhausen to Zurich in October 1913. So this is just the period before he enters his Red Book phase, his venture with the spirit of the depths, as he calls it in the Red Book period. Just before he begins that, toward the end of November, he's having this conversation with Sabine on the beach. And I think the most moving scene of the whole film for me was that one. The music in the background, one has to also take care to pay attention to. There's a lot of Wagner going on. And Jung and Sabine apparently talked about Wagner quite a bit in their conversations, and it comes up in their correspondence a bit. And there was a fantasy that Sabine held, and maybe Jung shared in when they were making their poetry in that period of intense interaction and love, that she would have a child by Jung, and the child's name would be Siegfried. And Siegfried would combine her Jewish genes and blood and his Germanic, Gentile Aryan genes, and this combination would be a heroic figure that would pull the two races together and create heaven on earth, or peace, or he would be a tremendous hero. That was the fantasy, and they named him Siegfried. She named him Siegfried. And in this last scene, when she's sitting there pregnant, and Jung says to her, "That should have been my child," which I doubt that he ever said, but in the film he says it, "That should have been my child." What you hear in the background is the Siegfried Idyll, very movingly played, and the Siegfried Idyll is Wagner's gift to his wife Cosima upon the birth of their child, Siegfried. When Cosima gave birth to their son Siegfried, a couple days after, Wagner arranged for an orchestra to come to their home at Tripschen outside of Lucerne here in Switzerland, line up on the stairs to the bedroom upstairs, and play this very moving piece called the Siegfried Idyll. And that's what you hear in the background of the film. It's very touching and very moving. There is Jung standing at the edge of the abyss. He's about to go into it in a month or two with his active imaginations. There is Sabina, quite healed of her psychosis or her hysteria, what she had, all the symptoms that she had brought to the Burke Hulsey. She's now a medical doctor. She's been with Freud. She's a psychoanalyst. She's a psychiatrist. And she's about to give birth to her child. So she is healed. He has been torn to pieces and left there, and he's going to have to put himself together, which he does over the course of the next 5 years or so through his active imaginations. So that's how those pieces fit together. The film, I think, raises a lot of these questions and issues. I think it's true in a very deep sense that I think the experience with Sabina Spielrein really did touch Jung at a very deep level. In Sabina Spielrein's letters to Freud, she describes some of their conversations. Those letters are published in Aldecart Nuda's book, in which she says that Jung showed her his diaries. We know from a note in the diaries that Sona Shambasani includes in the Red Book that Jung left off writing his diaries in 1902. He got married to Emma in 1903 on Valentine's Day. He didn't make any further entries in his diaries after that until 1913, apparently. And he shows Sabina Spielrein these early diaries, and she says that he, in the diaries, she finds evidence that he had been deeply in love with the subject of his doctoral dissertation. It's just the initials are given, SW, in the text. But we know that was Jung's cousin, Heli Preiswerk. And that Jung's relationship with Sabina Spielrein had somehow touched this earlier experience that had then been transferred over, Sabina Spielrein says, over Freud's daughter to her, Sabina Spielrein, and she had to free herself from that. Clearly, Jung was deeply moved by something that he discovered in his relationship with Spielrein that really brought him to a very deep reflection on his life. He didn't know how to solve the problem, and at that time, he didn't do a very good job of handling the relationship with Sabina Spielrein, according to the documents that we have. At any rate, there were a lot of loose ends left after they ended their romantic relationship. But it's clear that the relationship between Jung and Spielrein had a very deep effect on Jung, as it did on Spielrein as well. And so this is an early case of a relationship that begins in a psychoanalytic treatment, goes quite beyond that, and ends in a lot of questions that Jung would have to work on for many years to come, and finally probably answers most powerfully and profoundly in his essay on the psychology of the transference many years later in 1946. So that is as much as I want to say about the film. I'm now going to ask Angela Graf-Nold, who's a historian of the period, who studied the records of Sabina Spielrein's hospitalization at the Burghölzli Clinic in detail, and who knows a great deal more than I do about the history of psychiatry and psychoanalysis in Zurich, and she will give us a lot of very interesting information about this background. So, Angela.
Thank you. Yes, for me, the film was really strange because the facts I know from this story gave me a quite different fantasy. It's always that facts are here and you always make to the facts, you make fictions, and to the stories, behind the stories you have a history. Yeah. And it is a very interesting thing that the story of Sabina began with a big trunk, a steamer trunk of documents, and although Caritenuto took only some of it out and made his story out of it. And so did all people following, and all made their own stories. And for me it's a funny thing to have a picture that's very different, and the actors, the play, what is in my mind, is very different. We have the actors, the ideas, the plot, and the story, and for me it's the story of the Zurich School of Psychiatry, which didn't begin with Jung. And Jung also was not the real doctor of her, but she was a patient of one of 380 patients in 1904. And therefore the story is quite a little bit different, and I'm interested how you think these real facts, perhaps they also make a modification in your understanding of the story, of the many stories which are around. The whole thing is here. You see the Burghölzli from the south, and you see the Zurich Sea, the lake, and the town, which was not very big at that time. It was growing. It was about 100,000 with a whole agglomeration. And you see, the Burghölzli is a very big building. It was not for 300 patients, but always there were so many. And you see, they have for farmers, and you see they have a factory, and that was a main thing, that they made his occupational therapy, and all patients had something to do. And it was not for saving money, it was a part of the theory, of the practical thing, to give the patients a meaning in life back, and to make if they contribute to the functioning of the hospital, it should be a good thing for them. And that was the staff at the Burghölzli some years before Jung came. It's not Bleuler yet, it's his teacher, his predecessor. The second from the left side, it's August Forel. And he was the man who shaped the whole practical functioning, because he was a very multifaceted personality. He was a part of Burghölzli from the beginning. He was an assistant of the very first director, and he became director in 1879 in the age of 30. He was also very young, and this picture is about 20 years later, when he decided to stop working there, because you see he is a little bit tired. He was a very strong man, and he was a big neurologist, and he introduced hypnosis as a first psychotherapy, and he was first in Europe who did this, and he fought in many political things to make to prevent falling ill. He fought against alcohol because alcohol was the most patients had problems with alcohol. Therefore, he made a big association against alcohol with international scope, and that was very important for him. Now in this year he wanted to retire, because he wanted to dedicate himself to the sexual enlightenment. He saw that the sexual question, as he told it, is a very big thing, and he wanted to write a book about that. And he really did it, and it became a world bestseller. You see in this picture too that his staff, 4 persons for 380 patients. You see, that's very. You cannot imagine that it would be today like this. And you see, although that he had that's not a waiter, that's a doctor, a medical female doctor. He was the first who supported women as doctors, and he gave them an appointment, what was not usual at that time. At the same time, when Forel was director of the book Huxley, Bleuler was director of the asylum near 60 kilometers away in Rheinau, at a half insula of the Rhine, and there was a case which was thought to be incurable. And he was also a pupil of Forel. He was also fighting against abstinence, and this was his group also for 300 patients, and that he had 2 doctors and the others were administrators. And that also important man for Zurich, it's Konstantin von Monakow, a friend from Forel and Bleuler, a neurologist, and a part of the discussion group which always took place when alternately in his office or in the book Huxley, and he was also a part of the discussion group when Jung began and Bleuler to discuss psychoanalysis. He was very critical. And that's an important friend also from Bleuler and Forel. This was Adolf Meyer. He had studied with Monakow and Forel, was a pupil of him. And because there was only 1 chair of psychiatry in Zurich, he decided to emigrate to the States. But he was a lifelong, they had exchange in letters, and Meyer sent many pupils of himself to the book Huxley to study what he did there, because it was very new and very scientific for him. The keeping of records was important, the observation was important, and all these things which are important for scientific work. Forel was also a famous neurologist, and you see here in this picture is shown that he discovered that the neurons were not bound with growing together, but with synapsin. And that was a discovery which was made by other people too, but it's striking that Forel was a very important man in this area of neurology. But then he met Bernheim, and that changed his attitude to the psychiatry, because he began to say that neurology cannot change the everyday life of the patients, and he wanted to make a difference and found that Bernheim, with his hypnosis, could have an impact and he could make differences in the patients. And he visited Bernheim in Nancy, where he was, and he invited him to the Burghölzli. And Bernheim learned them to hypnotize as well the patients, as the colleagues, as the waiters. And this is a connection to Freud, which Forel had, because Freud translated Bernheim's book into German, and Forel knew Freud very well, and Freud knew all the Forel, and asked him for a recommendation when he visited Charcot. And Forel asked him to make contribution to his journals, which Freud also did. Freud published one of his first pieces in Forel's journal. Freud was not an unknown person to Forel, but he was not important. And then his book of hypnosis, Forel's book, was also translated into English and published in 2006. And he also referred to Freud in this book and to Freud's studies of hysteria, which he found, yes, it's interesting, but it was nothing so special. I copied this because of the biographical note, formerly professor of psychiatry and director of the Provincial Lunatic Asylum Zurich. That's another translation for Burghölzli. But it's not so known that the Burghölzli was a very ambitious thing for Freud, because he had to rely to Forel. The studies of hysteria, which were published in 1895, marked a little bit a change in Freud's approach, in contrast to Bernheim and Charcot. That's well known. Bleuler made a review of this book and was very enthusiastic and thought it's really something new. And what was new was, if you read it again, it's very funny how Jungbist treated the patients, because he gave them massage and he visited them daily, and he hypnotized them, and he spoke with them, and he reported the sudden changes. And I think this was the reference for psychoanalytic treatment for Jung, because it was the Freud of the studies of hysteria. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, also Bleuler that, oh, the new things with 3 essays on sexuality, I cannot follow. And therefore, if Jung treated Sabina, he treated like this. I don't think that he made massage, but he treated in this method of investigating and relaying to the symptoms and waiting and looking and observing and being close to the patient. And naturally, it's very interesting that this thing that patients fall in love was very common. All these female patients fall in love with their doctors because it was such a close thing, and therefore Forel was very critical with this, because he said the hysteric patients are patients with over emotional. They only want to seek the near. If you make hypnosis with them, they are aggravating the symptoms. The symptoms are artifacts, and you have to be very strict with hysterics, and you are not allowed to make hypnosis if you are not very experienced. The most important thing for hysterics is to give them a new purpose for life, and to make the ego structure stronger, the ego complex. That was Bleuler's expression for that. That was, although the book Horsley from another side, you see that has a wall around, but not a very big one. And you see here now Jung standing before the building at about the time when Sabina came as a patient. At that time, about 03, Jung was just married, and he lived not in the book Horsley because he had quitted the book Horsley and was looking for another appointment, but he didn't find. He went to Paris, and and then the secondary doctor fell ill, and Bleuler asked him to come back. And that was the moment when Sabina came. No, that's not the right thing. I will tell later. He just had decided to come back and to make a habilitation and to stay as a secondary doctor and to move back to the book Horsley. That picture is a picture of how Sabina was treated, because she came when her parents wanted to take her back to Russia. She was in a hospital in Interlaken in the mountains, and that was not very successful, and the other clinic didn't take her, and they were in the hotel, in one of the best hotels. And in the night, she became excited or whatever. The police came and the doctor, and they said, we have to admit this girl to a hospital. And so she came to the book Horsley hospital with her uncle, midst in the night, and Jung was at that night in the duty, and he admitted her as a private patient. And private patient you have a private room, and a nurse is sleeping in that room. That's a nurse. I cannot say it's a nurse of Sabina, because all nurses had to sleep in the rooms of the patients. They had no own rooms, and they could only go home over the weekend. That was changing only 20 years later. But she was then admitted, and she was admitted as a private patient, and private patients meant she was the patient of the director, not of Jung. But naturally, Jung could treat her as a representative of the director. And in the record, which is published still, you see that the entries were from both. Although Bleuler made entries, not so much, but also. And it was usual that every day there was the group of the doctors came together to speak about what was happening with the patient. And naturally, for the private patient, perhaps they had a little bit more time. And I think they had a little bit more time also because Jung was preparing his habilitation work, and he was very interested in treating a hysteric like Freud, and to make this as a subject of his habilitation. And he did that. But it was not only Jung's Freudian approach, it was also, and I think much more, the approach of Bleuler, because when Jung detected that the core problem of Sabina was her relation to her father, who was very tyrannic and controlling and perhaps a little bit sexual transgressive, then he treated the parents, and he wrote about 20 letters to the parents, and he was very, very firm and very clear to them. And for example, the father wanted to have a report every week from Sabina, and he said, "Oh, I forbid, it's forbidden." And he controlled the letters, and if the parents didn't answer, they wrote again. He wrote again. He wrote the same, and he wrote, "Would you please answer the letter of your daughter?" And he said to parents that she needs an independent development. She will stay here and she will study. And that was very difficult because it was a Jewish father who was so much in control, and it was very hard. And sometimes you see in the letters that the father wanted to withdraw her from the treatment, and he didn't allow. He then said, "Yours is better, and he's helping the doctors, and he's working scientifically." And so he could calm them down and really to improve her and support her to study at university. It was really not Jung who supported her studies. She had at first a certificate from Jung who said, "Mrs. Spielheim, he's staying here since months, wants to hear some lectures." And then Bleuler gave a news that Mrs. Spielheim, who suffered from a disturbance, is now very healthy and wants to enroll as a student. And so she could begin as a student at the university. And then a new chapter began because she was discharged from the Burghölzli, and Jung was not anymore her doctor because there was no outpatient relation normally. The patient were discharged and there was no polyclinic or something else. But it was clear that it was very difficult to Sabina because she was not very confident in her abilities, and she had a temper which was very bad and evil and inflated and depressed and with many inferiority complexes and many social inhibitions. And it was in this situation that Jung met her privately, and he said, "I wanted to help her because I knew that he cannot cope alone." And in this time after her discharge, this relationship developed in the States from student, friend, poet, and that's what we saw in the film, but it was not in the responsibility as a patient-doctor relationship in the closer sense. And it was many years after he was in duty of her treatment in the Burgholzli. And he quitted the Burgholzli in 2009, and that was also the end of the relationship, of the poetic relationship. Her studies, I think her time of studies was not an easy time. She moved about 12 times in another location. She was very unsteady. So she could have many Russian friends because at that time the university was there was a big scene of Russian students, especially women, because in Russia it was forbidden for women to study, also especially for Jewish women. And when it was known that in Zurich it's possible there came a big invasion, and the university liked it because they paid much more than the United States. But he did cope with what was needed. Nearly at the exams, he made a little bit a plagiat. She take especially in developmental anatomy. She had a sheet by and wrote, and the professor saw that it cannot be and made. He wrote on the. I think that's not her own, and we know out of the letters to Jung that it was really not, a little bit faked. But she passed the exams and could be a medical doctor, but naturally not in Switzerland. It was not an exam which enabled her to be a private doctor in Switzerland. She only could make a doctoral exam with a dissertation, and the dissertation she also did with under Bleuler about a case of dementia praecox, about what the patient told, and she made an analysis of that. And this dissertation was published in the Jahrbuch of Freud, but it was a real funny dissertation, I think. I reread this, and it was very intuitive, but not really scientific. And strikingly, it was a patient who wanted to have a baby from Forel and from Jung. Yes. And after these exams, there's always said in all the stories that she became a psychoanalyst and a doctor and a very big scientist. But if you look closer, she had never a real success in all things, and she was never self-sufficient. She was always dependent from the money of her parents, although when she was married, until she returned to Russia. After her exams, the father wanted that he would come back, but he didn't, and went to Munich and studied history of arts and made his quite famous piece of destruction as a cause of coming into being. What was really a little bit for me an authentic piece because it relates to Russian philosophy. But that was the only bigger thing we wrote. And afterwards she went to Vienna. She wanted to settle as a psychoanalyst. She went to Freud, but she couldn't take patients there, only for free. That was not to make a living there. Then she married. Her husband came to Berlin, a contre-cœur. He didn't want really. He couldn't make a living in Berlin. She didn't want to be in Berlin. She came back to Switzerland. She came back to Lausanne. Her husband left her. She had a child. The child was ill. She had no money. She had to give the child in an institution for children. She had no money. She had no child. It was a very hard living. And it was the only time in the 20s when she had an appointment at the Institut Jean-Jacques Rousseau at Geneva. That was an institution which was a private foundation of the Genevan School of Educational Psychology, Claperet, Flournoy, et Beauvais. And that was the only time that she could say, write to her parents, I'm earning money, I'm 1,250 francs a month. And her mother answered, oh, how much must you have to work for this poor Sabina? And that was for me also a little bit an ambiguous sign from at home. But after a year, she had left the work. Though there were very interesting people, and she was the analyst of Jean Piaget, one of the famous psychologists, but the collaboration didn't function. And after a year in all this, she also had no money again. I don't know who paid for her or who gave her sentence, but out of the letters you see, she was totally in desperation. And in this situation, she decided to go back to Russia. This was not very easy in this time, and she made an application to the government that she could come back. And in this situation, she left all these papers. And these papers, which were the beginning of Karatenuto's work, it was not only the letters Freud and Jung, but it was all private things and letters to friends and letters to the parents and Russian diaries. And it's not all published. It's still this big suitcase. And afterwards, her fate didn't go better, because of the political development she couldn't work very long. She had some work in schools and in the psychoanalytic kindergarten, which soon was restricted, and the Stalinists came. Her brothers were executed. Her mother died. Her father died. And finally, 70 years ago, she and her 2 daughters, because after her return to Rostov-on-Don, she reunited with her husband and had another child. And in 1942, she was murdered with thousands of other Jewish people by the Nazis. That was, for me, a rare, very moving story, but there are things which move me much more, the whole thing, and the whole fate, and I think the time it occurs was perhaps her best, I think.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela, for all the information you've shared and the research you've done, and really gives us a picture of the times that the story took place and the background and who the other figures were. As I said, in a film and in a dramatized version, stage play, you get such a reduction to a few themes, a few figures, and of course the creator's imagination takes over, and you get a whole different narrative than what you see when you examine the facts.
Yes.
And the history. Very different picture. And I thought that was very important to bring that into this seminar today, to give another perspective on these people that you see portrayed in the film. What you see is a version of the story. Now, the themes that are raised in the story, of course, are perennial themes, the themes of relationship, conflict between an older father figure and a younger up-and-coming student, Freud and Jung, the themes of love that can develop within the analytic relationship, Jung and Spielrein, themes of a rebel spirit, and a puer trickster, Otto Gross. These are themes that we continue to deal with, and I asked Jan Wiener to come into the seminar because she has given a lot of thought and has written extensively on the subject of the relationship in analysis and what can happen there, and she's done a lot of supervision of cases. She's very experienced. Jungian psychoanalyst herself, a senior member of the Society of Analytical Psychology in London, and has recently published a book on transference and countertransference, her Fay lectures from several years back. So I'd like to now ask Jan to come online, if we can get her, and do her.
Let me interrupt it a little bit. First, the internet traffic in London is actually quite high right now, it turns out, and we've had some troubles establishing fully, with London. They're working on that now, and they're hopeful that we can get them back on. We may end up doing a different configuration where they broadcast only from there, and we might have some limited audio between them. So I was thinking, if Murray, you're okay with that, maybe we can go for questions for a little bit. We'll take a break in 15 minutes, which would be right around the 12:30 mark, and then hopefully the technicians can work to see if we can get Jan back on. She was on briefly for a while. In fact, you keep hearing the audio kind of pop back in. I'm pretty sure that's them trying to restore the connection. So why don't we do questions for a little bit, and we'll hopefully have Jan Wiener back on after the break with that. First of all, Murray, do you have a audience there?
Yes, we do. We've got five people in our audience here, and I think they've got some comments and questions to make. I'd like to just start off with a question to Angela, and that is, was it Sabina's idea to study medicine in particular, or was that Bleuler and Jung's idea? Because she seemed to have more of an interest in the arts, actually, music and things.
It was Sabina's idea. She told this at the beginning. I want to study medicine. And it was not possible. in her country.
I see.
Her mother was a dentist, but didn't work. It was only a short time that women were admitted, and at their time not.
Okay, Steve, do you have questions there, or should we?
Yeah, so I was thinking, we've got a number of internet questions, and I'll be asking those at various times. I do want to remind the internet audience to press the button that says Ask a Question. It's a balloon-like button. You might have to exit out of your full screen streamer, though. Go to the right-hand upper corner, click Exit Full Screen, and then you'll see the balloon button. We've already had a number of questions, and we'll keep looking at those. Why don't I'll ask Asheville in a moment for questions, so you guys can be thinking about it here. Before I do that, that's probably Jan trying to break back in. Zurich, do you have any questions from the audience there? And then we'll go to Asheville questions.
Would you all have questions or comments? Bill?
Yeah, briefly, just the one, in the movie it was shown that Sabina worked closely with the association experiment, and this seemed to be a little atypical to me, but you'd mentioned that there was this occupational therapy that went on.
Yes.
And you had not talked about that.
Yeah.
Was that a poetic license of the movie, or did something like that eventually happen?
Sabina's occupational therapy consisted in helping the doctors in association experiments, and go to the lectures and accompany the doctors who went to the patients. And but in the film, it's an association experiment with a psychogalvanic thing and apparatus. That was not at that time. That's not factual. That came later. That was only normal associations.
Without the GSM.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And there was, I think, something to make the counting of the middle time and such things, and to observe the persons, how they reacted, and that associations experiment were always a group event. They were not made alone, and you needed many persons to be there.
Oh, really? That was a group event.
Yes, yes.
We had an example of that. Some engineers at school last semester came out, and people who had an interest in historical medical equipment, and actually put that on. And I think, you remember, I think it was like 4 or 5 people they needed to actually operate all the equipment. It was not digitalized at that time.
It was in October.
Yeah, it was very good. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
it was with me. Yes.
Yeah, it was excellent.
Yes, yes.
And so you could see how many people would take.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a very.
Especially naturally the psychogalvanic experiment, because it's dark. If you need someone who follows the point in the darkness, and you need someone who observing, and some who's doing that and who's doing that. And I found this very interesting, that there were only so few medical doctors, and they made, without any money, the research which is still today valid or interesting.
I had one quick follow-up question, and I think it's probably a bit more difficult, but when I've read about Sabina, in a way she's kind of presented as a real great example of the talking cure. Here's someone who, in the movie comes in very ill and comes out minted an MD.
Great success.
I
think it was not so.
Yeah, one of the things that you said that got me was that, she had a very difficult life.
Yes.
And the question is, how much of that was sociological, being a bright woman at that time where women weren't maybe generally accepted into the professions, depending on your country of origin, and how much of that was latent illness, personality issues, those kind of things that weren't addressed. In your research, did you get some clues or cue to
when she was discharged, it was noted that it was improved, not healed. Yeah. And I think really that was the case, because she had so much problems to bring something down. She never had a real place for living, always moving, always unstable, very unstable. And her husband left her, and he said, "Why are you so unpractical? And why have you such a cruel addiction to science?" And I think it was a little bit like this. It was very cruel, because with science she couldn't make any living. It's more than today art, but she had no positions, she had no funds, she had no, her works was on one page, an idea, but she didn't want to stop. It was not like an artist who has nothing to eat.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There's a number of internet questions, but let me first ask Asheville, any questions in the room? Go ahead. Yeah, push that button to the light screen.
A two-part question. As you were talking, you were saying you get these pieces of information, these facts, and you string together an interpretive process. And the medium we've had is to go from stage to film. The other medium to deal with this would be biography. And so my question would be some commentary on some of the biographies that are out there, your opinions of their strengths, their historical accuracy. And then the latter part, we mentioned this last scene of them together and the Wagnerian music in the background. One of the things that he says to her in the film is, everything important I've learned about myself has come from you. And I wonder how accurate that is. And so two parts, sort of the overall field of biography, but then also the historicity of that particular exchange.
You ask me.
Well, yeah, why don't you?
Yes. Biographies. There's a new biography from a colleague from me, Sabine Richebecher. She is only in German, and she's a Freudian, and that makes it for me quite a little bit difficult, because he has this opinion. Jung left her and went over to the Nazis, and Jung was responsible for the Nazi ideology, and that makes the picture very wrong for me, because it's really not from any impact on her. And what Sabine Richebecher made new, she made much research in Russia, and she researched the history after the return to Russia, and the political events which cost the life of her brothers. And but that has nothing to do with relation.
What do you think about the book by John Kerr, Most Dangerous Method? That's a big, thick book that focuses really on this period.
Yes, for me, excuse me to say, it's a sign to entertainment.
What?
It's entertainment with science, mixed with science, because he's very clear and with footnotes, and then he makes statements which were never objectivated.
And not supported by
any facts. Yes, and this much fantasy put into the facts mixed with real things, and therefore it's a little bit a dangerous method how to work to work like he did. Yes, for example, he detects.
Go ahead and repeat the question if you can. If you could repeat the question.
Where Kerr is really off the track, where he's really exaggerating.
Yes, he made detection of Jung's protocol of the association test, which cannot be because it's out of date. It's out of the association don't make any sense, and he puts the sense in. My marriage is in question. I have to prevent the pregnancy of my love and so on. And that's not. It's not true. There are many proofs that it cannot be the Jung's protocol. Because of the dates and because of the answers and the style. He says that's also a thing of the language, because, for example, in Germany it is the one word is scheiden, and the answer is in German meiden. And scheiden and meiden he translates as divorce and I don't want. But in German, it's totally different, because scheiden is also to make a difference, and meiden is something else. And if you look in the association studies, scheiden meiden is a very normal answer. It's like the popular thing. The most people make this, and it's not specific. For example, that's one of these.
Let me ask an internet question, and then maybe we'll take our break and see if we can't get Jan on the system. This one comes from Heidi Townsend, and it says, does Sabina have any living relatives at this time? If so, do you have any information on them? Any ideas, Angela?
Yes. I don't know whether she's only relative is still alive. It's a daughter of a brother born in Berlin, Menucha Spielrein, and she was the one who is responsible that the records could be published, because the records were restricted in the book Hulsley, and all the Corretinuto wanted, and all were said, we only give it if all relatives agree. And it was clear for all that there would be no relatives. But my colleague, Bernhard Minder, who was an assistant at the same time when I was at the Hulsley, a medical assistant, he found this Menucha Spielrein and got her allowance to publish that. And I don't know whether she's alive. She would be about 100 now, I think. Perhaps she may be.
You found her in Berlin?
No, in Russia.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe
well, thank
just
you.
Before the break, we should mention that another film was made about this whole incident in Jung's life. Ich hieß Sabine Spielrein.
Yes.
My name was Sabine Spielrein, by Elizabeth Marton,
yeah.
who really sticks with the documents. What do you think of that film?
I think it's a nice film.
Yeah, better than this.
Yes. He brings much more emotion, and I wondered why a film about so emotional subjects. For me, the film Dangerous Method didn't bring emotion for me. But Elisabeth Morton's film was made with much emotions, and it brings much emotions. And it's a more documentary. She also went to Russia and filmed with the real document there, and with real places.
On the places.
Yes,
Right.
and all those It's much more a documentary.
Yeah.
It's not so much fiction.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you. Jan, if you can hear us, we're going to take a break for 15 minutes, and we'll hopefully get you restored at that time. And we'll keep working along those lines and try to get that going. And if not, we'll certainly have plenty of discussion. I suspect there's been a lot of questions already that have come on the internet. So why don't we take a 15-minute break, and we'll reconvene at that time. Thanks. So I would say, Jan, why don't you go ahead and begin, and whenever you're ready for questions, I'll jump in, hopefully with not too much echo, and we'll go from there. So you're on. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first of all, my apologies to Murray and to Angela. Murray, I heard the first 5 or 6 minutes of your talk, and Angela, I came in and out of aspects of your talk, but I did hear the questions. I think I'd like to preface what I'm going to say, following on from Angela's talk, is that 70 years on from her death, Jungian analysis is really thriving in Russia. It's something I've been personally involved with for the last 15 years, and there are now more than 35 qualified, internationally recognized Jungian analysts. So I think Sabine Spielrein might or might not have been pleased about that. I've seen the film A Dangerous Method 3 times, and I noted to myself that my interest in the characters, in their relationships, my respect for the actors, the filmmaker, and the scriptwriter has deepened each time I have seen it. So I guess there is perhaps more to the film than meets the eye. Although I rather agree with Angela that it didn't affect me emotionally a great deal. I've been asked to present some of my clinical reflections from the film on aspects of the analytic frame, the boundaries of analytic treatment, and the analytic relationship, with a particular emphasis on transference. This is an area, as Murray was saying, that has absorbed me for some years, particularly as for Jungian analysts practicing in different parts of the world today, thinking about the significance of the role and relevance of transference within the analytic relationship remains as hot a topic for dispute and debate as it was for Freud and Jung more than 100 years ago. It's my intention to frame my talk around Cronenberg's film as it has been presented to us, and to use its evocation as my base camp, as it were, from which to explore the analytic relationships as they are lived out within the film, and the unconscious processes of transference and countertransference. I have decided not to enter into the arena of historical accuracy about what is established fact or what is the director's narrative smoothing for dramatic effects. Issues of truth are the territory of Jung scholars, and I will for the most part not address them. However, I do think that this film is a thought-provoking portrayal of the genius, the creativity, and the often lonely struggles of our founding fathers and mothers to research through experience the unconscious and its power to both hinder and foster development. And it's given me the opportunity to review what we have learned about the analytic relationship during the past century, to observe what remains intact and what has changed. My first significant thought about the film was that had Jung been a current member of my own society, the Society of Analytical Psychology in London, then chances are he would most certainly have been reported to the Ethics Committee for his treatment of Sabine Spielrein, perhaps also for his treatment of Otto Gross. At the very least, he would have been sanctioned for careless breaking of therapeutic boundaries. At worst, he would have been expelled from the SAP for serious sexual misconduct. Consider the following possible breaches. 1. He breaks the boundaries of confidentiality when he mentions Spielrein's full name to his wife, after observing with surprise the coincidence of the code name Sabina he has chosen for his patient and her actual name. 2. Jung gives Spielrein no warning about an intended break from the analysis, unaware of the strength of her attachment to him and the power of her transference to him as her analyst. 3. He combines treatment of her with walks outside the consulting room, undervaluing the need for a private, quiet place to provide an environment where patients can feel safe and trust can develop. 4. Euler, the director of the Burg Hölzli, suggests to Jung that he invites Spielrein to join him in a working relationship while she is still a patient. A questionable invitation today, I would think. 5. Although the film, and actually I think this is its weakness for me, skates only very briefly over the course of Jung's actual treatment of Spielrein, there is no real planned ending to the analysis, which continues after she's left the Burg Hölzli. And 6, worst of all, although in the film the analysis appears to be over, Jung sleeps with his patient, an abuse of his power as her doctor. A modern code of ethics advises strongly against analysts forming social or sexual relationships with their patients, even after the treatment is over. Like Jung, Joseph Henderson believed that transference projections can be worked through, leaving what he called symbolic friendship with the analyst, especially later in the analysis when the personal transferences are worked through. From my own experience, I wonder about this. Is the patient's transference to their analyst ever fully resolved? That's a question. But it has to be said, Jung is not a member of my society, and all this happened more than 100 years ago. Jung and Freud had no professional societies to belong to, no personal analysts with whom to work on their countertransference experiences and unethical longings in relation to their patients, and no supervisors to help them develop professional competencies. The professionalization of our discipline has certainly changed our thinking and understanding about the significance of boundaries and the analytic frame. And the main impetus for this has been the growing realization that the relationship between patient and analyst is a very powerful one. Patients develop transferences onto their analysts, and analysts need a good sense of their own external and internal boundaries to manage the effects on them of these attachments. I'd like to say a little bit about frame and boundaries now. In the words of Catherine Crowther, the analytic frame establishes the scaffolding that helps to stabilize the emergence and building up of an experience of inner space where creativity, self-discovery, and relationship with the other can grow. End of quote. We make boundaries around the analytic setting so that our patients can feel safe enough to develop a sense of trust. This provides a container in which a relationship can develop, including the potential for curiosity and play. From Jung's interest in alchemy, he talked of a vas vena clausum, the alchemical vessel in which base elements, massa confusa, are mixed and added to, leading to a transformation into gold and the discovery of the lapis, or philosopher's stone. This was Jung's metaphor for the realization of the self. Our experience of boundaries, then, is surely archetypal, since for the newborn infant, with only a rudimentary capacity to see, one of its first capacities, as well as the perception of light, is to be able to distinguish edge, the boundary between two planes. Boundary making is inevitably also culturally influenced. Anthropologists tell us that the first boundaries that are collectively internalized are the awareness of sanctity and the awareness of taboo. I suspect that Jung and Freud discovered only gradually how to make appropriate boundaries in analysis. I've been wondering whether actually this was easier for Freud than for Jung, because Freud's rather obsessional and pedantic personality and his emphasis on neutrality, abstinence, and anonymity in the analytic relationship, vestiges of the medical model, may have fitted more comfortably into his practice than Jung's deeply held belief that both analyst and patient are involved in the relationship and are changed by it. Boundary making and attention to the analytic frame are not general rules as such, but rather need to be translated into internalized boundaries, what I call an ethical and analytic attitude to our work. Boundaries vary depending on the context. And personally, I can think of images for at least 3 different work settings, demanding boundaries which are of different textures. The first I call the sanctum, that private place of analysis, a 2-person relationship in our consulting rooms, where the setting needs to preserve reliability, continuity, have some built-in limitation, and a good deal of ritual, actually. The second is what I call the citadel, reminiscent of the hospital outpatient psychotherapy department in which I work, demanding citadel-like walls to protect the clinic from management pressures to meet targets, so that we, in this citadel, can maintain a reflective space for therapy to proceed. Finally, there's what I call the souk. Somebody called it the souk, but actually it's the souk, rather like an Arab bazaar, perhaps a picture of general practice in the UK, or maybe a hospital such as the Burghölzli, where busyness means that space for reflection is often defensively avoided, requiring a culture where meetings have to be made sacrosanct in order to enable discussions about patient and staff dynamics. It is impossible in a discussion on frame and boundaries not to mention the use of the couch. In the film, Jung is shown as rather uncomfortable adopting Freud's method of sitting behind his patient. Actually, I thought this was done far more effectively and poignantly in Christopher Hampton's film, a play, The Talking Cure, when it was on a few years ago at the National Theatre in London. In A Dangerous Method, Jung introduces the idea of sitting behind Spielrein by saying that it will be less distracting. The film suggests that it will be easier for Spielrein to respond to Jung's questions and to talk about difficult or embarrassing feelings if she cannot see him. It is interesting that later in his career, Jung actually turned against the idea of sitting behind his patient, preferring face-to-face sessions, and I think that in many parts of the Jungian world that continues today. In Memories, Dreams and Reflections, Jung says, "The crucial point is that I confront the patient as one human being to another. Analysis is a dialogue demanding 2 partners, analyst and patient, sit facing one another, eye to eye." And it says eye to eye. That doesn't. The double meaning of the eye and the eye, self to self, is also important. It was said that Freud sat behind his patients because he didn't like being looked at, particularly later in life when he became ill with cancer of the jaw. But I would like to wave my Jungian flag for the benefits of using the couch. This was part of my training in London. I do not sit behind my patients, however, when they choose to use the couch. I sit rather to the side so that they can look at me should they wish to. I find that patients often find it easier to relax when using the couch. They may find it easier to free associate, a kind of daydreaming, giving better access to their unconscious contents, their imaginative thinking, and also their physical sensations. Personally, I find it easier to track my own emotional and physical reactions especially when there is turmoil in the patient that affects me. Jung thought that using the couch worked against creating a natural relationship. But in a way, analysis is neither an entirely natural relationship nor an entirely equal one. It is rather a particular kind of relationship where the analyst is treating the patient, where physical contact is precluded, and although the experiences are very real, the therapeutic alliance implies an implicit agreement between patient and analyst about the boundaries of this joint venture. I'd now like to move on to talk about transference and countertransference. Consider first of all this quotation from Jung. Emotions are contagious because they are deeply rooted in the sympathetic system. Any process of an emotional kind immediately arouses a similar process in others. Even if the doctor is entirely detached from the emotional contents of the patient, the very fact that the patient has emotions has an effect on him. And it is a great mistake if the doctor thinks he can lift himself out of it. He can do no more than become conscious of the fact that he is affected. This is a remarkable quote from Jung in Lecture 5 of the Tavistock Lectures, written some years after his relationship with Spielrein and what we would call today his working through of the effects on both of them of their powerful relationship. And the quote brings home with clarity that Jung's sharp intuitive capacities were alive from the earliest days of his writing and in his clinical practice. Jung knew about transference, I think, in his bones, and although unlike Freud, he didn't present us with rich clinical case histories, I certainly feel that he actually could be said to have invented the concept of countertransference. And his profound beliefs in the archetypal nature of unconscious processes alive between patient and analyst, in the emotional impact of analysis, and its potential for making meaning, finds generous support at the beginning of this century from contemporary research in the fields of neuroscience and attachment theory. The development of a mind and the capacity to make meaning emerges through relationship. Non-verbal and unconscious interactive processes go on continuously in infancy and adulthood, and therefore by implication in the transference and countertransference relationship. Jung's quote, I think, stands up pretty well to the tests of time and suggests too that he learned from his relationship with Spielrein. And given Jung's obvious talent in this area, a question to be asked is why the role of transference in the Jungian world, as I mentioned at the beginning, is at best controversial and at worst a hotspot for profound disagreements. I think there are probably three central convictions that bring us together as Jungian analysts or analytical psychologists. The first is our strong belief in the power of the unconscious as much greater than the capacity of the ego to understand it. The second relates to the value of the self as an organizing and unifying center of psyche, seeking to bring together and mediate the tension between opposites. And the third is that a symbolic capacity and the development of a transcendent function facilitates the process of individuation. However, when it comes to theories about transference and how to work with transference projections, the Jungian world divides radically. Some analysts believe that the development of symbol is more important than the process of transference countertransference itself. Others believe that it is only through working with the transference that any real change can occur. My own view is that we need an approach to the symbolic that respects not only the psyche's capacity for image making, but also acknowledges, and I think this is the important point, that a symbolic capacity inevitably emerges in a relationship. So one has only to survey Jung's writing on transference to realize his ambivalence about this topic, expressed in his contradictory statements, sometimes even in the same paper. Inevitably, this has attracted the interest of a number of authors, each keen to understand why this was the case. Bernd Steinberg and Michael Fordham carefully surveyed Jung's writings on transference. Steinberg thought that Jung's ambivalence could be attributed to his hurt and anger with Freud, and also because he encountered personal difficulties with patients that led him to play down the significance of personal transference. In fact, Joseph Henderson, recalling his personal relationship with Jung, remarks that Jung tended to refer the patients who had too strong a transference onto him, he'd refer them on to Tony Wolff. Fordham was more generous to Jung, considering that it is possible to find some sense of continuity in his writings on transference if they're viewed within the context of the cultural preoccupations of the time. So what is transference? Both transference and countertransference were originally viewed as obstacles to the analytic process, and it is only more recently that their importance as a central tool for gaining access to the unconscious has been acknowledged. Among the Freudian psychoanalysts, although I've said that I think Jung really was the first one to intuit countertransference, it was in the early 50s, people like Margaret Little, Winnicott started to write about countertransference. And I think it was significant that this happened just after the Second World War, when many patients were coming to analysts talking about their experiences in the Second World War. And I suspect analysts were deeply affected, hence the greater interest in the countertransference. Jung uses the German word Übertragung, meaning to carry something over from one place to another, to define the term transference. His emphasis was a broad one and could have encompassed both the personal and the archetypal transference. His approach to transference was largely theoretical, and he didn't give us many detailed accounts of his clinical work, as I said earlier. From the film, I suppose we could say that Jung lived out the transference experientially with Spielrein. And on the whole, Jung used the term quite vaguely. He didn't want to confine the meaning of transference just to the projection of parental imagos, keeping a place at all times for the archetypal. In Jung's usage, the transference often became a description of the analytic relationship as a whole, and his interest in alchemy and the symbolism of the Rosarium Philosophorum was intended as a metaphor for the stages of development in the analytic relationship, what he calls transference. Transference emerges in different ways with different patients during analysis. The important thing is that it's an unconscious process, an inevitable part of all analyses, stronger sometimes, quieter at others, sometimes directed onto the analyst, at other times onto other people in patients' lives. Transference as we understand it today is a natural archetypal process, multi-beamed and multi-directional in character. It brings different beams of transference, including the erotic, the psychotic, the negative, the idealizing, and the addictive. Sometimes it seems to be absent altogether. What is transferred is always unconscious, a complex third in the patient with roots in the patient's past, a mood of the moment, not yet conscious to the patient, an internal object projected into the analyst, an infantile anxiety or fantasy, and then suddenly something new and archetypal, activated for the first time within the analytic relationship. Each of these transference projections has the potential to activate the analyst's countertransference affects in different ways, and if carefully processed and returned to the patient in a manageable form, can lead to new insights. In a way, the film is all about transference, and actually is a wonderful case study of some of its different expressions. In the film, Jung views Freud as a father figure, and Freud manages, I think, to incarnate the archetype projected onto him with his rather rigid approach and his fear of having his ideas undermined. The only way that Jung can find his own path forward is to rebel. The transference between them cannot be worked through, and their relationship ends, leaving both wounded, albeit in different ways. Spielrein begins, I think, with a negative, rather aggressive transference onto Jung during her adolescent crisis. Jung, in fact, contains her anger rather well, without retaliation, especially when she slashes his face with a paper knife. However, he manages the erotic transference rather less well, becoming caught in what we would call today, or what I would call, a countertransference enactment, drawn into reenacting by spanking her sexual excitement when being hit by her father. Personally, I found far more erotic energy in their professional relationship and their exchange of ideas than I did in the sex scenes depicted in by Cronenberg in the film. I realized after I wrote this paper that I'd left out Jung and Emma, and I thought, well, maybe that's significant because, in a way, the transference was powerful, but was presented in a particular way in the film. I suppose one might think of Emma, who I think in the film was portrayed in a rather mature way, being able to bear Jung's infidelities and to hang on. I mean, whether one would see that as a kind of maternal transference, the mother that's there reliably, would be interesting to discuss, I think. And what of Jung and Otto Gross? Gross comes over to me as a trickster character. I'm not sure what you said, Murray, so I hope I'm not repeating some of what you said. He comes over to me as a trickster character, rather childishly rummaging about in the drawers of Jung's consulting room, stealing things. They seem to be involved in what we could call today co-counselling. But in terms of the transference, Gross represents most probably a part of Jung which he cannot yet own, the wish to be more spontaneous and to feel free, especially in his sexual life. In my own... how am I doing for time, by the way? Am I all right?
You're fine.
Okay. In my clinical practice, I find it helpful to make a central distinction between working in the transference and working with the transference. Subjectivity always involves an interactive process. Those of our patients who have experienced a mother capable of mediating and regulating the emotions of her baby are more likely to develop internal capacities to soothe and manage themselves when in distress. Other patients who lack the experience of a mother who could tune in to their emotions remain easily upset and volatile, developing the hot responses typical of borderline or psychotic states of mind, or the colder schizoid reactions of those who have shut off from relationships, leaving them isolated but protected from frightening intrusions. Working with the transference involves analysts in decisions as to whether, when, and how to interpret the transference projections of their patients. Analysts listen with an open mind and use their bodily sensations, thoughts, and imaginative capacities to interpret the transference when it comes to mind to do so. The analyst needs to create a receptive space with which to meet without prejudice their patients' unconscious communications, including transference projections. It involves a letting go, a receptive state of being, much like meditation or reverie, but also a more ego-orientated function in order to appraise and understand the meaning of what it is that we are experiencing with a patient. This is countertransference, and this is what let Jung down in his treatment of Spielrein. And it is indeed often a difficult task to distinguish which of these news headlines belongs to the analyst and which come rather from patients' transference projections. There's only one point in the film, as far as I can recall, when Jung and Freud work with the transference. This is on the boat when Jung brings his dream to Freud, and I'll paraphrase because I can't remember it exactly. I'm on the Swiss-Austrian border. There is a ghost and also a shabby customs officer going through things. Freud says to Jung, "This is something about us." He refers to the transference. Freud thinks he is the ghost, or maybe the shabby customs officer, I can't quite remember. This serves as a significant turning point in the deterioration of their relationship. Freud is hurt, and although he tells Jung that he has had a rich dream the night before, he withholds it from Jung because he would not wish to risk his authority. I have got a section here on clinical controversies, but I think probably I'm going to leave it out for now because I think I've probably only got another 5 or 10 minutes. But they mainly centre around the fact that I think Jung and Freud have very different models of the unconscious, and that has implications for how we understand transference. Freud did continue to think as transference as a resistance to remembering, and talked about analysis, talked about the method of repression, and that through the transference, which was new editions of old conflicts, patients would remember things. Jung, I think, with his purposive model, had a different model of transference and was much more interested in the not yet known than the repressed. So I think my view of transference would be transferences happen for a purpose. They're there for us to think about and understand. And in truth, I think in the Jung-Freud letters, Jung did try to understand Spielrein's transference onto him, and the letters in the spring and summer of 1909 are well worth reading. I would recommend them to you. The other controversies were around Jung did not just have a concept of personal transference, but was interested in archetypal transference as well. I think the question about transference is how to use it. I'm not one of those analysts that feel everything is in the transference, but it's actually quite skilled working with the transference. Again, I think this gives me a lot of forgiveness for Jung in perhaps some of the muddles he got into with Spielrein. And the last controversy is around Jung's interest in the personality of the analyst, which of course is extremely important but quite difficult to understand. So I'd like to, if I can have another 5 minutes, make a few conclusions. At the end of the film, Jung talks in a convincing way about his love for 3 women using evocative imagery. About Emma Jung, he says, "She is the foundation stone of my house." Of Toni Wolff, he says, "She is the perfume in the air." And of Sabina Spielrein, or actually in the film to Sabina Spielrein, he says, "You are the jewel of great price." A colleague of mine, Anne Shearer, with whom I watched A Dangerous Method, posed a question that has been preoccupying me ever since. Where, she said, does transference end and love begin? Where does transference end and love begin? I guess the subject of love in analysis could be the topic of another Asheville seminar, but let me end with a few reflections on this subject. There has to be love in analysis if it is to work. About that, I have no doubt. First of all, if we are to practice as good analysts, then it seems to me we need to have a love of analysis. But love within the analytic relationship is an altogether more complex matter. And the question arises as to how to differentiate what Jung calls the real relationship from transference love. Jung's personal struggles to understand the nature of his love for Spielrein are well expressed in the Jung-Freud letters, and I'll read the quote. "Since I knew from experience that she would immediately relapse if I withdrew my support, I prolonged the relationship over the years and in the end found myself morally obliged, as it were, to devote a large measure of friendship to her until I saw that an unintended wheel had started turning, whereupon I finally broke with her. On top of that, naturally, an amiable complex had to throw an outsized monkey wrench into the work." Love can mean both an attachment of benevolent liking as well as a passionate erotic relationship. As Le Pen remarks, only the context tells us what kind of love is meant, and sometimes even the context leaves us with uncertainties. Jung is confused about the nature of his love for Spielrein. His benevolent attachment is expressed as a duty of care in case she will relapse. But there's also sexual desire which frightens him. I suspect that this overlap is mightily confusing for all of us at times, but it challenges us to define the nature of love in analysis. Transference love onto the analyst can ultimately be healing and transformative, helping some patients to find a loving capacity within themselves and in their relationships. Spielrein recovers from her adolescent crisis, I think as one of the questions points out, in good part due to Jung's work with her. For other patients, an eroticized transference, if it persists, can be defensive, addictive, and ultimately prevent such transformations. Many of the early analysts got into trouble with their female patients, especially those diagnosed with hysterical disorders. Ferenczi comes to mind here. They lived the transference, but they did not really understand it. And using Wilfred Bion's metaphor, they were in the storm centre, unaware of the centre of which they were a part. Even Freud, as early as 1909, recognized that there will be inevitable mistakes. In the Jung-Freud letters, Freud uses Lassalle's analogy of a cracked test tube to make a point to Jung, and this is a quote. In view of the kind of matter we work with, it will never be possible to avoid little laboratory explosions. Maybe we didn't slant the test tube enough, or we heated it too quickly. In this way, we learn what part of the danger lies in the matter and what part in our way of handling it. Wise words even today, I think. Kenneth Lambert, a London analyst, used St. Paul's concept of agape to talk of a 21st century, I suppose, attitude to love in analysis, acknowledging that the analyst is personally and deeply involved in the treatment, but in a benign way, and that for good enough parenting, facilitating the symbolic processes of regression, death, rebirth, and repair to occur, the relationship has to have some limits. The film left me with the impression that although there was clearly a strong, passionate bond between Jung and Spielrein that went beyond the limits of agape, the transference was to an extent worked through, and I think they did love each other. In contrast, the transference projections between Freud and Jung involving power, competitiveness, and idealizations could not be worked through, and their relationship ended, leaving a legacy of difficulty that endures today. For love in analysis to be in the service of our patient's development, there can only be closeness if there is also separateness, difficult though this may be to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. That was very, very nice. The audio is still a little bit difficult. I've got some echo when I turn on my microphone, so I'm going to try not to talk too much. Actually, that's probably helped it some. So, Jan, we may have difficulty asking questions back and forth depending on the audio, but we can certainly try to do so as well. But thank you once again for such a marvelous talk on transference, countertransference, and especially how it interplayed with Freud, Jung, and Sabina Spielrein. I guess first question, Murray and Angela, do you have any response to Jan's talk? Anything that comes to mind? We have plenty of questions that we'll try to get to. We have time, but anything from Zurich?
I think Jane has explained the transference and counter-transference from a understanding of today, and it's clear that at that time such things were not yet established, and in his studies of Hysteria, which was in 1895 and which was the model for Jung, Bleuler and Forel, the term transference, Übertragung, is mentioned at the first time, but in a quite a little bit narrow understanding. That's a hysterics transfer to the doctor strange things. And it was not yet the meaning, something of counter-transference, and that was developing many years later, this understanding. And therefore, I think one cannot say Jung would be expelled from the society, because there was nothing at that time. You have to see what it was in this time and what it is today. And Jung developed his understanding of transference very long time afterwards, only in the 40s and 50s, and that's 40 years later than the treatment of Sabina.
I think Jan would say, and I'll let her say it herself, of course, too, that the sense of the analytic container and frame and all the rules surrounding that we have today are modern, are a product of the development of the psychoanalytic and the Jungian traditions, and that all these hallmarks of the ethical responsibility that we assume as analysts today are something that we're aware of now as a result of the experience of many other people who went before us and that we learned from, and we have been taught and supervised in a very different way. So you're right, it's a totally different world. Today there is training that's very specifically geared to these questions of frame and container. With Jung at the Bergholzli in the early part of the 20th century, of course, it was a very different situation, wide open. And it was a hospital setting with 300 and some patients and 4 or 5 doctors responsible for them, and the work therapy that was also required of them to put them back on their feet. And it's a very different model of treatment than what we're talking about as analytic treatment today. Yeah.
It's very frustrating. I can't see you. I can't see you. So
but you can hear us, okay?
I can hear you fine. I completely agree, Angela. And in fact, I think that's what I was trying to say. And certainly when I read through the Jung-Freud letters, that Jung, in the most extraordinary modern way, is very self-reflective. But absolutely, and I think it's because of those experiences and issues about boundaries that people didn't understand the transference, that somehow we do have a body of knowledge now. And I think I was trying to make a comparison between what happened in the early days with, if that was the case now, actually, a modern Jung, we know more, so and presumably we would manage boundaries better. And in terms, I think that's right. Jung wrote most of his stuff on transferences in the Psychology of the Transference volume. But it amazes me. His intuitive capacities, I think, were so sharp. And the quotes about doctor and patient both being affected really are about transference and countertransference, and really do hold up today with all the research about the way in which developments in the mind can affect the brain and vice versa. So although he perhaps didn't write about it or understand it fully, I feel he somehow intuited it from that early period in the 1909 and so on.
I think it became a very big issue for him, because he saw that that's a relationship and both are affected. That's very crucial for the Jungian theory. That's not only the patient is transferring something to the doctor and he is a hero, but it is in between and makes both concerned.
Yes.
And he called his countertransference reaction an illness, actually. in a letter to Sabina around Christmas time, 1908, where he says, when you were ill, I was your doctor, and I took good care of you. Now, please go easy on me. I'm ill. And he was ill with a countertransference reaction. That stirred up a lot of early material in him. He was reflecting about his childhood, he says, in some of those passages. It goes way back to some suicidal tendencies that he felt he had as a child, where he almost slipped off the bridge and into the river. I think he was profoundly affected by this relationship, and it really led him to his self-analysis and to the whole Red Book experience later. Felt he had to dive in there and find out what was really going on in his unconscious.
Well, it was certainly making me, since my job was to make some clinical reflections on. Now in our trainings we all have our own personal analysts, we have a lot of supervision, we have opportunities to, with the help of our analysts and supervisors, to think, to make more sense of our countertransference. Again, how remarkable it was, perhaps for both Freud and Jung, that they managed to do this alone. And in a way, perhaps that's why we have such good discoveries. There is a certain extent today where it's easy for things to get over-cleansed almost in a way, or over-worked out. But I found it very fascinating to see the film, read a bit around it, and contemplate the differences that exist then and now. And indeed, how do we train people?
Jan, I'd like to ask you, just to change the subject a little bit, the question of Freud's Jewishness and Jung's Protestantism, that comes up in the film. At one point, Freud raises it, and Jung says, well, what difference does it make? And that's taken as an indication that he doesn't understand what Freud was suffering from, the anti-Semitism of Vienna at the time, and so on. Mm-hmm. And then when Sabina makes contact with him and leaves Jung, Freud says to her, well, we're both Jews, and we're different. He makes an alliance with her through the Jewish heritage against Jung, who's not. So he's trying to pull Sabina to him. This is also in the letters. He says that in a letter. Yeah. We are and we will always remain Jews, and he is not. So never forget that, she says to him. What do you think about that in the transference area? That what was going on between Jung and Freud? I mean, that the Protestant Jewish business.
And Jan, before you answer that, could I intervene? Would you be able to turn on your lights? You're pretty dark there. If you could turn the light on, and there's a lot of ambient noise from the road too. I don't know if that can be taken care of. But if you turn the light on, that'd be helpful.
I don't think we can do anything about the road, but well, it's interesting you choose that question, because I made a decision to avoid that. And maybe I'll come clean, since I'm in the middle of trying to write a paper about being a Jewish Jungian analyst. I'm Jewish myself, with parents that came from Middle Europe. I think Cronenberg in the film clearly chooses to emphasize that it's a transference based on difference, I would have thought. I mean, that's the first part of it. And Cronenberg makes the point in the film, I think, also later on. I don't think it's actually, or at least says that Tony Wolff also is half Jewish. So that there is a wish to make a point that this is a transference of difference. Anyway, that's how I would think. It's an attraction to difference. In terms of Jung and Freud, well, I suppose I would say much the same kind of thing. I'm not sure, actually, how much they presumably that was part of the interest in each other. They were from different cultures, one Jewish, one non-Jewish. At the time, I don't know how much it mattered. I think later on it mattered. But I don't know, Murray, perhaps you have some thoughts about it.
I think Jung was very naive about it at the beginning, at least and the way Cronenberg presents it. I think Jung took the cultural difference and the religious difference very lightly, and I think Freud was very aware of it, and he was eager also to set psychoanalysis out on a course that wouldn't be seen as purely a Jewish profession, and Jung was the way out of that for him. But I think Jung's involvement with Sabina, and Tony Wolff was not Jewish, by the way. That came up also in the in Talking Cure. I don't know who first came up with that idea, but I think there was this fascination with the other culture. She was Russian as well. I think there was something about. In the break, I asked Angela, what was it that really hooked Jung about Sabina? Was it her Russianness? Was it she wasn't a great beauty? Was it her intelligence? Was it her otherness, her difference? There was something that really appealed to him, and he also loved Freud. He tells Sabina, she reports this to Freud in a letter, that Jung was telling her how much he loved Freud's face. There was something about Freud's mouth or the way his face was constructed that he was so fond of, and he felt a very deep affection for Freud. I don't know if that was philo-Semitism, a particular attraction to the Semitic, to the Jewish, or if it was just circumstance. But that card was played in the film, and it was played by Freud during the break and after the break. With Abraham, he mentions that Jung is other. He doesn't understand psychoanalysis so well because he's a Protestant. He doesn't quite get it, and he does the same thing with Sabina. So I think it was in the air somewhere. But I think Jung didn't pay enough attention to it, maybe, to bring it out.
Well, I think if we go along with Jung's idea of the purposive, that the transference isn't I don't think it is a resistance to the treatment. It can be, but that it has an aim, then I think it has two sides, doesn't it? I think we're probably agreed that it is somehow an attraction to difference, a wish to know more about, perhaps a wish to know each of them, Freud and Jung, to know more about themselves through an experience of the other. But of course, the shadow side of it, in terms of Freud saying to Sabina, well, we are both Jews, reminded me of Rosemary Gordon's idea that we all need enemies to sustain our sense of ourselves, which you could... So in a way, it has a purposive, positive aspect, but a much darker shadow to it, I think, as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have some questions to look at, and we might need to mute London because I'm getting feedback, when I speak, but I'll try to turn mine off when that's, there it's working now. And we can turn London's mic back on when I stop speaking. Maybe we'll do an internet question, and then we can go to the different sites and ask Zurich and or Asheville more questions, so people can be thinking about that. One that popped up, which is related to an earlier question I'll read, says, what about the film alluding to Sabina, sowing seeds for Jung's work on the feminine, her articulating gender as a factor, and the beginning of the anima/animus? And that kind of dovetails with another question we asked earlier that we didn't get a chance to fully dive into, which was the quote in the movie, at least, everything I have, I've learned kind of through you, Jung to Sabina. So any thoughts from either London or Zurich about to what degree did Sabina Spielrein help Jung in these various concepts, certainly animus, but even in a broader context of many of other Jung's thoughts. So I'll open that up to both sides.
I could say something about that. I mean, my sense is that these two men didn't acknowledge her work sufficiently. And there's a new book which you might like to look up on Amazon. I can probably find the name of it, but it's by a British family therapist called Jan Wiener. And what he has written about is how actually Sabina's interest, I haven't read the book yet because he only let me know about it yesterday, how Sabina's interest in evolutionary psychology has had huge implications for work today and never really had a chance to flourish. So my sense is, yes, probably she was an influence, and whether it's because she was female, whether it's because she had been a patient, or whether she got caught up in the relationship between Jung and Freud, the ideas that she had and the work that we know about indeed shows that.
But the anima concept, Angela, do you know if Sabina had played any role in it?
I think Jung had so many relationships which are assigned to anima figures that it's difficult because there is Maria Molzer, who is a very big figure for that. There's Toni Wolff, there's Sabina Spielrein. They're all patients. I think it's not only her. It's an inner development, and we cannot say which outer woman he met may be the cause. I think it's too easy. It's more an inner development to find the inner woman in himself. And naturally, all relationships contribute to that. Perhaps all the relations to me.
But the idea of the genders having both, each women have a masculine component and men have a feminine component. That idea wasn't original with Jung either, was it? I mean, that's.
It has a Swiss history in the soul as a woman, and it's a famous book from a Genevan psychologist and natural scientist Charles Bonnet, the Faculté d'Âme, and there's a book with a female figure at the beginning, and the female is the soul. As the soul, and I think that Jung had followed the Swiss line of psychological thinking in this developing the anima figure. It's not only here; it's a line of history. He always refers to the soul as a female figure.
And
for the mean, who made this picture of the soul. Although Charles Bonnet was a man who describes the soul as a woman.
In the Red Book, when Jung calls out, "Soul, where are you?" and the soul finally appears, it is a woman. Also, it's a female figure.
Yeah.
So, but that's after his experience with Sabina Spielrein. I don't know if she had any thoughts about this. Did she, in her studies of philosophy, Russian philosophy and so on, was there anything like this that she would have proposed to Jung, saying, "Listen, Carl, you've got a female side, I've got a male side,
No, she was normal gender orientated. She said, if I could be a man, all would be easier for me."
I see.
That was her thing. But she didn't think I'm a female.
She didn't have the sense of the complexity of gender.
No, I don't think
Well, why don't we go to Zurich for questions? And Zurich, if you can pan your camera back a little bit, we're cutting off most of Murray Stein's head, if you don't mind zooming out a little bit, or moving closer, which is fine. Yeah. And any questions from Zurich, and then we'll go to Asheville for questions.
Over it. Are you finished? Any questions, David? No? Yes.
First, I'd like to say thank you for the interesting short lecture here on transference. And I would like to ask a question to Angela, since she's is the treasure of facts. And I will probably come more from a filmmaker, since I'm also a filmmaker. And that means that when I watch a film, I also take into, and I will refer now to transference, my transference with the film. And I believe that there is an ethic responsibility from the filmmaker's, work. There should be some ethics. So I feel that my burning question is that there is a tendency among us to avoid the subject of the ethical responsibility of the filmmaker. We talk about the film in a way that this is what happened. This is what Jung did. And I spoke with Angela in the pause, and she said there is no proof whatsoever that these spanking scenes have happened. And for people who are outside the Jungian field, they can get this impression. So I think I really hope in the future that there will be a webinar on how we will deal with films and its powerful manipulative energy. And some days ago, I watched The Way of the Dream by Marie-Louise von Franz, and she says movies are our modern times fairy tales. So I really look forward more to this. And could you comment a little bit, Angela, on this, how you feel about the split of facts? And we are discussing, and we don't really know what we are discussing. Are we discussing a fiction? I mean, yes. Film is like a dream, and when we dream, we dream.
My transference to the film was, although not. I said it didn't move me because I find the fiction not a true fiction. I find the fiction a fake, and because I thought if I wouldn't know that the one figure was Sabine Spieler and the Jung and Freud, the whole film would crash, because I have so much to imaginate from the reality that it functions. The film doesn't function for himself, because the fiction doesn't function for me, because it's not interesting what happened. I cannot, if I see this woman admitted to the hospital, I have no response that it could be true like this, because it's if something is in a bad state, nobody would go behind him. That was impossible. And it's normal, naturally, if something in an excitement comes to hospital, you have to contain him, and you have to look who is accompanying him, what's happened, what was the actual thing, or why are you so excited? Please tell me the people who come with you. And therefore it's not, for me, it's not true. That is not the same as it's not factual, or it's not the historical truth, but it's not true in a deeper sense for me.
So you could say that part of our discussion is based on a fantasy of David Cronenberg.
Yes, I would say that. Yes.
So we must be really careful when we say Jung did this and his transference was like this.
That's my.
Because I find that a really because there's more films like this that we really should add on our schedule. The interpretation of films. What is film and analytical psychology?
You have no idea what happened to this woman. You have no idea why does he make this funny movements with her face. And that's,
let me read
that's less.
Let me read a question, kind of comment that really fits right into what we're talking about right now. This comes from Scott Feaster. When the discussion, as Rafael Lopez's predecessor, I don't know who that is, but as he used to say about art, try to psychoanalyze the film instead of letting the film teach us psychology, i.e., what is going on in the director at the time that makes the images come to life for us. Really precisely what you're all saying. What is the film saying about the director and the images and the conscious?
Yeah, I'd just like to add just shortly that for us, when it's about Jungian, if it's a film about something else, we should always respect the artist. He or she has all the right, but we must be very careful when we overdo it because of a reason that could be that we start feeling inferior if we don't understand this specific art, that we should drop, just as we drop in front of the client, we should drop, this kind of feeling that, if I don't understand this film, then maybe I'm stupid, I think we have the right, and for those who are interested, there's a Russian filmer who has written a book called Sculpturing in Time, and it's a lot about the ethics and the specific power of film, because we enter it, just as we enter a dream. And I think it's very important that we don't get stuck in the content of the film, that we go into the form. What it's one psyche doing to another psyche. Just at the start, we could take it as a fairy tale. There's two black horses, there's two men, it's dominance of masculinity, etc., etc. But what is it doing to us? And how much do we get carried into that power and then start a discussion of the film? Or start a discussion of something about Jungian psychology? That's how I feel.
Mm-hmm. May I say something?
Please.
Yes. Well, I think it's a really interesting question that you've raised, and I must say I felt like that the first time I saw the film. But having read the transcript of an interview that Andrew Samuels did with Christopher Hampton, and having listened to a Russian woman I think she's called Helena Basil-Morotsova, talking about Cronenberg's interest in this film and why. It at least gave me some understanding of it. I don't think that necessarily answers your question or helps with the ethical responsibility, but I can tell you a little bit about that. Cronenberg is, of course, very interested in the body, often in a very perverse, extreme way, and I think his reason for being interested in this film was really to debunk Jung's ideas about the soul or interest in spirituality, and show actually that the body wins out. Maybe he's supporting Freud's theory of sexual libido, but that was his aim, I think, and the aim was very much to leave the viewer with the impression that the wounds are not healed. The wounds, as you might say, the wounds that are there and hopefully ultimately become healing, but to leave Jung ultimately still wounded, and not to bring body and mind together in some way. That's a very brief, but at least having understood that helped me to make sense a bit of what Cronenberg was trying to do with this film. Whether it's ethically responsible or not is such an interesting question.
I could just add to your question, because it goes right in, and I listened to a few interviews with Cronenberg because I'm into what is his psyche trying to do, because he's not detached. He's involved, otherwise he's not a good filmmaker, and he's an excellent filmmaker, making film. And Cronenberg said 2011, when this film came out, this is what Cronenberg says himself: I feel more empathy for Freud's approach to the human condition. I think Jung represents a flight from the body to spirituality, and I believe Jung ultimately became a religious leader. End quotes. In 1992, he says, I'm a non-believer, and I have been forever. We're all going to die. That is the end of all consciousness. There is no afterlife. There is no God. So those things cannot be separated from the filmmaker. And I think the first one is it's in action, and I mean it raises, the film raises issue that we can discuss. But I think also, since Jungians are trained to really notice subtleties and analyze and the form and what is not spoken, I think here we have a great opportunity, you know, to go in under and see what is happening, you know. Not that there is any final answer, but it really raises my passion for really increasing the studies of film inside Jungian, you know, psychology.
Good point. Thank you.
Let me ask one more question here from Asheville, and then we'll be close to winding down, but go ahead. Question here.
The question I have is, I'm a marital therapist, and I think that there's a teleological purposive kind of reason for folks coming together to be married. And so my question is, what's the difference between transference issues that happen between an analyst and an analysand and the same kind of issues that happen in a marriage between a man and a woman, or a man and a man, depending on whether you're gay or lesbian? But I mean, the same process of falling in love seems to me to mirror some of the same things that happen in an analyst-and relationship. So what's the difference between the two, if any?
Jan?
Well, yes. I mean, people say that falling in love is about psychotic transference. So there's a huge overlap. I think the difference between the two is how we work with it. I think it's a great mistake to make transference interpretations to one's husband, wife, partner. But in a way, I think, as I said in the talk, transference is an archetypal, multi-beamed process. It happens all the time whether we like it or not. In the analytic relationship, it's how we use it that's different. And I think that was the big discovery. I mean, in a way, through Freud and Jung and Spielrein and Otto Gross too's experience, was that actually this can be a really helpful tool. And it's not that dreams are the only royal road to the unconscious. There are different roads to the unconscious, and there's a transference road to the unconscious, which is a very subtle instrument, and I think people need training how to use it. But it's a very useful tool. So I think it exists everywhere in our own personal relationships and in the analytic relationship, but we choose to use it in a particular way to understand our patients and ourselves and the relationship better, because, you know, we have transferences onto our patients as well.
Angela, did you want to say something?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Transference is not restricted to a therapeutic relation. It's always.
Also, you have to turn around and say that the therapeutic relationship is a very human relationship. But it's a setting in which we also study relationship and how it works and what are the roots of the relationship, whereas in lived relationships you don't make that kind of a move, typically.
Until something goes wrong.
And then you go to a marriage therapist.
Let me ask one last internet question, and I know we'll need to wind down in a moment, because it was asked from a number of different people. It might be the good final question. What was Emma Jung's role in all this? Did she fully know what was happening, and how did it affect the relationship with her husband, which is sort of a marital question as well? Any thoughts on that from any of y'all?
I think Emma Jung reacted naturally with a disappointment, but she was very firm in her relation, and she made the consequences to be more herself and to develop as a person. And she made it in many ways, that she wrote for her own to Freud, and she learned if the children were elder, she became an analyst herself, and she tried to develop as a person. And she was not this etheric woman in the film. She was very down to earth. More I cannot say.
Yeah. I think she and and Jung were much closer and more intimately connected than the film would show. That's my impression, at least. That also in his work and his ideas, I think he shared a lot with her. And she wrote a book on anima and animus later in life, for instance, and I think her. I mean, he was not an easy marriage partner. That is for sure.
You think?
And I think it was a struggle to keep their marriage going, although they lived in a very traditional setting and with all the children in the house. Incidentally, it was in the middle of this relationship with Sabina Spielrein, which was at its height in 1908 to the summer of 1909, that Jung and Emma were building the house in Küsnacht. They moved into that house in the summer of 1909. And they were actively involved in the architectural plans for the garden and for the house for about a year and a half before they moved into the house. So that's another thing that's going on in his life while this relationship with Sabina Spielrein is really reaching its peak of intensity. He's also very active in his family and was very interested in the house. And we had a seminar some time ago with Andreas Jung, who's now living in the house. Went back and studied the whole process of putting together those architectural plans and building that house. And Jung was very involved in that. So he was in his family. He was in the relationship with Emma and the children and participating in all of that. And at the same time, this whole business with Sabina was going on. So it's a very complex picture, and you don't see that in the film at all. As I say, when you dramatize a story, you take the thickness of history and you reduce it to a couple of basic elements in order to make it interesting on stage and in a film. And the point about the ethics of doing that with a real historical figure, is a question, especially when there are still descendants of that family around and a whole profession built on that figure. Jungian analysts worldwide are subject to scrutiny because of a film like this. So, I don't think there's a court that a filmmaker has to answer to, but this question about the ethics of art and filmmaking, I think, is a very, very important one. And it has been considered by filmmakers themselves very carefully, and some have taken it very seriously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, I want to thank everybody today. I know it's been challenging somewhat with the technical pieces, but we were able to get through that and work pretty well with a little bit of noise and here and there. I want to remind people we have two really exciting seminars coming up, still. In May will be the Red Book. We'll continue and look into the imagery of the Red Book. And then in June, we're going to do this larger combined project with the International Association for the Study of Dreams, as well as England and Zurich. I think it'll be really, really nice. So one last time, I'd like to thank Murray and Angela and Jan. I think you all three just did a marvelous job, and we've so appreciated tonight. So thank you again.